3, 2, 1, back in action.
Shall I clap?
No, all good.
Okay.
I'll clap again.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. I probably should have specified, yeah. The double. So on the second clap, okay.
The people, leaders in that environment are incredibly well educated.
Yeah.
They're incredibly skilled. And they are making intentional choices of working in environments like that. And that's the type of really skilled leadership that it takes to make change in environments like that. So that's another thing that I was very consciously aware of. I'm not going to have access to these incredible leaders if I was on a graduate scheme, and my social surrounding would be probably other analysts.
Right.
And not having access to the leaders in the corporate environments, and there's so many layers of bureaucracy. I am directly working with these incredible people at this early stage in my career. So actually, that was an opportunity that I could see. Like the people that are like 10 years or 20 years ahead of you,
Yeah.
I look at them and think, wow, they've got something right here. I need a piece of that. So again, it was positively reinforcing the choices I was making. I was like, okay, on this particular path, beyond this linear one, there's some magic here, and I've got to figure out what that is.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you said there, because it's another thing where, again, it wasn't groundbreaking, but there are certain sentences that I'll hear from, whether it's another podcast, whether it's a TED talk, or it's something that I've read that tend to stick with me. One of them was that connecting with your future self is quite a difficult thing to do, but do you want to keep doing what you're doing for the next 2 decades if this is what your life is going to look like? And that's something that you can ask someone and they can answer.
Yeah.
That, at the current thing, 2 decades from now, what you're doing now, obviously you want it to progress, but the things you're doing, do you want to do that? And, going exactly to what you've said, it's still, the admirable trait is taking that approach so early, because it can become very easy to put money as quite a high priority early in your career because you're not used to having it. For people who are used to having it, it's very different. Yeah. But, especially from some of the backgrounds that people like us have come from, money is not that easy a resource to come about, that it does gain quite a high priority.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, our measures of value and success kind of play out, and where then the skepticism of the choices I was making, in that period of saying to my parents, I'm actually not going to get a normal job and earn short-term money. I'm going to take a one-way ticket to India and work with a social enterprise. There was like family, and not just parents, are obviously certainly skeptical of that approach, because obviously what they know is education, and the path to security and stability is income and a stable job. Obviously, they didn't have access to what I was exposed to and what I was learning and gaining. So I can understand where that skepticism comes from. And I think this is where you've really got to back yourself to say, I know what I've experienced, and I can see the potential future value going down this path. So this is where I guess you got to push through. And
yeah, no. Let's talk about that point, because we touched on it earlier. How when you were 17, you did that that service leadership placement in India, and then you went to university. You tailored your courses because of off the back of that internship, but then you had that key decision to make after graduation. If I look back at my own sort of journey that I went through, I did voluntary work experience at an optician's, because at the time that was something that I was looking into. Then I reached a fork where, when it came to what university degree I chose, I had a decision to make. Still, it seemed like a move that could be made at that stage, because that is the time to explore, right? There's always time to explore, but it's very easy to explore then. After going through university, you've gone through a series of probably, and I'm assuming here, but the most dedicated set of education that you're going to do, or so it should be, depending on the course that you've done, right?
Yeah.
But that's when you've dedicated, money, because there's normally a university fee, years of your life to getting a label against your name which should, in a lot of cases, then influence the next move you make. So at that point, you're again at this fork where you take that degree to down the conventional route or not. So two things come into play. It's how you then decide that, okay, I'm at this fork, and being able to choose one way versus another, i.e. linear versus unconventional.
Yeah.
And also the family expectation is likely to increase at this point.
Yes.
So there's two sort of challenges at play. One is the internal decision, or the internal convincing of which route to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is dealing with the external almost expectation or external convincing of how much do I take what is expected of me onto board versus going again the internal convincing that I've done. So how did you deal with both that internal conversation and the external expectations put on you?
So internally, I think because of the exposure that I had the summer before and the learning and growth that I felt on that path, I think internally I was fairly sure that this was the road to take. Something external that was really helpful is during my final year of university, that social enterprise that I worked with that summer then partnered with the United Nations Development Programme.
Nice.
So I got to go out to India on a UNDP placement. And so that's something that's recognizable to, I guess, my family. So framing what the choice I was making to my dad, for example, was, I was like, no, look, I'm doing a UNDP thing. So I think that framing certainly helped a lot. And beyond any other skepticism, you just got to back yourself. You just got to go for it. And I think, I think that, so that was the internal. I guess the external thing coming, you just got to back yourself, right?
Yeah.
And also once you're on the flight and you're off.
Yeah.
So it's fine. And I think the other thing that I made sure was, although I wasn't earning any surplus income, all my expenses were taken care of. So I wasn't losing any money. I didn't have to, spend out of my own pocket to take that opportunity. And so I think that was a really important factor as well. So it wasn't like I'm going to my parents and being like, can I have some money to do this? Right. So again, it feeds into that perception that, what the skepticism of the choices that you're making, because this work, I guess, can be perceived as like cute or charity or not serious. You're not taking life seriously enough.
Right.
But obviously what I've experienced and what I've been exposed to, the incredible leaders that are there tackling these really complex challenges, the people that I'm getting to meet, my network is expanding. So I really valued all those other things beyond just the money. But obviously that wasn't visible to them. And obviously it's not what they know. And I guess as time goes on, and as, then I guess we can come on to this later, but as you go on to build Project Chakra, and again, that's, tetchy and stuff, but like, as you get success with that, whether it's through, I'm working with these universities that are brand recognizable, or money's coming in, or you're winning awards, then they're like, oh, okay, cool, he's doing all right.
Let's talk about Project Chakra. So what exactly is it?
Yeah.
And how did it come about?
So Project Chakra came about, from my point of view, from that initial experience on that UNDP placement, working with that social enterprise in India. So the founder of that social enterprise said, we could potentially run these workshops to, I guess, attract more kind of international volunteers, bring kind of more research to the work that we're doing, increase exposure. And because I had been a part of various like experiential natured learning before, and because that's certainly the foundations of what, my co-founder, who's my cousin, and other people in that environment had been used to, we thought, instead of just going to universities and doing a talk, we could design this experiential workshop that utilizes like gamification and role play simulations to bring the real on-ground realities of what was going on in India into the classroom. So that's what we did. We built that workshop. During that summer that I was talking about before, when I was trying to sell this workshop, I hadn't actually developed the workshop yet. So I had managed to sell this workshop to these universities like Imperial College Business School without having even developed it yet. So that in itself was a really interesting entrepreneurial process for me. And then once they said, yes, we're going to do this, don't know how or why that came about, then you suddenly have a deadline to then develop this workshop, because in a couple of months you're having to go back to the UK to deliver this workshop to students. And I think the workshop was again developed with the respect of a few things. So one is that, and this is how also the NGO in Gandhi Ashram kind of operates, is that there's a recognition that everything in our external world is a product of our internal world. So in order to achieve that external transformation, internal transformation is a really important factor in that process. And learning nowadays, so much of it at university, I'm sure you can empathise with, is revising for exams, listening to a lecturer talk at you, you're reading textbooks. So what we have done through developing this type of experiential workshop is enabled the learning to go beyond the content, go beyond intellectualization, where participants are feeling real emotions, learning by doing, feeling the learning outcomes in real time, and importantly, building empathy before you go to that solution mode. So we developed that workshop, ran it at these universities, and I didn't know what to expect, but they went really well. So within a couple of months, when I got back to India, we had both students and professors fly out to India to kind of build further partnerships. The students applied it to their master's project in innovation. They came out to India, worked with the social enterprise on the ground, and inspired by that whole journey that they went on from participation in the workshop to the exposure in India, they were then inspired to then secure working roles with social impact organisations in India as a start to their professional careers beyond graduation. So again, it really validated an assumption for me that, you know, I valued this path that I'd been on. But to see that happen for them validated that assumption that if I really valued this path, then I think a lot of other young people could value this as well. And certainly student aspirations or young people's aspirations for what they want to do within their careers is changing, right? I think the Deloitte Millennial Survey says that 47% of Gen Z want to make a positive impact on the world through their work. So I'd reflected on the fact that I was so fortunate to have these pathway opportunities opened up to me through this India-based program, through the mentorship from my cousin, through that internship in India. So I was able to just activate that pathway as a choice after graduation. So Project Chakra, I guess, when we work with young people, is our way of opening up these opportunities for other young people who are curious like me.
Yes, I mean, you know, it's amazing. And I've spoken to you a lot about it before, but I think that's provided such a great context to understand from your journey what you've gained from your early experiences and how this is now making such an impact. You know, and just when you were speaking there, it can be very easy for someone to hear that and think, well, oh, you know, the stars aligned and it happened and, you know, everything kind of worked, it ended up in motion and now it's having a good impact. But going back to the thing you said right at the start of that is that you went out and you sold programs before there was even something actually in place, and then it was brought into at that point. So anyone who's ever tried to, you know, work on a creative passion or a skill of theirs is likely to have heard the term of passion is the enemy of good, right? Which was said by Voltaire. And it's just making the idea that as people chase making something perfect, a lot of the time it results in no action put into it altogether. So that's something that very easily could have been something that you've done, where you were trying to perfect it, build it out, and then go ahead and reach out to universities once something has been completely built out. You chose not to do that. Maybe it would have still worked out, but the fact that you acted early validated it and they liked it, and then you went and did the next bit. It kind of fits into why this quote is so powerful in the purpose that it can serve. That sort of action oriented, you were already convinced that this is something you wanted to do and you dived into it. Is that something that's always been there, or do you see, again, in your upbringing or the way that your previous generations are, why that mentality is kind of formed in you?
I think, I'm not too sure. I think certainly in that process, I think I had a lot of fortunate support from other incredible mentors and leaders that would enable me to take that approach. And I describe that time of developing the idea in the workshop before having sold it as being unconsciously competent. Because what I then learned subsequently when I went on this entrepreneurship program, that I was turning up to these universities with like a leaflet with kind of what the workshop may entail. I was researching and finding very specific contacts at universities and writing very specific emails to them. And so what I learned is that leaflet and that approach was me developing and creating an MVP test, which I didn't even know what that word meant before then. So I think it was just very fortunate to have the support that I had around me to action that approach. And I guess you're just using your sense or intuition or common sense in that approach. I think something that is interesting, and maybe that does tie back to family upbringing, is our relationship with money and how we're incredibly frugal. We're not materialistic at all. We don't spend that much money. And I think that approach has actually influenced my entrepreneurial approach. So we were able to do so much and take things such a long way without any money. So we had sold the workshop, having not spent a single penny. The workshop development essentially took our time. We didn't need, although it's an incredibly immersive experience, we didn't need lots of money to make it happen. And even with Project Chakra now, we haven't raised a single penny.
Wow.
We've just grown through revenue. And we've massively bootstrapped. And I think certainly, I guess, that approach has been incredibly valuable to get us to this stage that we're at now. So I think there has been an influence of being frugal and, bootstrapping, and that approach has certainly been influenced by upbringing.
There's definite benefits to that are very well communicated these days, especially as people are tapping more into inner consciousness and stuff about being less materialistic, right? And the idea of, I think there's this quote where the best thing about having less is that you have more time. But on the flip side, looking back at that psychology of money, and I can completely relate to it, with that frugality, were there any downsides to that kind of psychology?
I think, yes, in this, it's hard to really know. I think we're at a stage now with Project Chakra where I think it's very useful for us to raise money and for us to take things to another level. I think we've done what we've been able to do with really bootstrapping. And so, for example, like our marketing, for example, isn't where it should be. We don't go around with professional things. And certainly, I guess these small things with money could have took us to maybe a different place than we would be now. But it's hard to know. But I certainly sense now it's almost like we've done our time. Like we've done the struggle in building Project Chakra to where it is now. And now we're at a stage where we feel now we are justified to spend the money on it. Maybe.
Yeah.
Can I ask, has this kind of psychology of money and relationship with money played out in kind of the things that you've done? So, for example, this podcast setup, right? I've walked in and you've invested well in making this what it is. Like, how has that played out for you?
It is a really good question. Yeah. And I think it's why I can relate so much to the responses you've given, because we're kind of raised, with this idea where, we weren't spoon-fed everything in terms of, we weren't bought everything. And again, what you said of the idea of you can't believe what you can't see. So it's, if you're raised in this environment where your happiness was trying to be bought by your guardians or whoever you're surrounded by, you might lead to then be more materialistic, because your sources of happiness come from that extra gift that you're given. Not being raised in that, and definitely being raised in an environment to appreciate any money that you do earn. I still remember a story of birthday money that I got. It had fallen behind my bed, but I didn't know that. So for 2 weeks that money had disappeared, right? And then I remember my dad telling me, where's your birthday money gone? And he picked me up from school one day, and I was like, I don't know, I've like no idea where it's gone. But I just I didn't appreciate the value of money then, especially when it would be given to me on my birthday. And I got a massive telling off, not because of not because of the quantity of the money, but because I just was very blasé about where it had gone. And from that point, it made me, he did it in a very, people spend a lot of time to earn this money, they've given it to you. So I can see how that mentality is carried through. And to exactly what you're saying, there's two parts of it, where one part of it is coming from a background of don't overspend where you don't need to, tying that in with, and this has been spoken about on a lot of previous episodes, where they took a lot of the risks to minimize the risks that we have to take.
Yes.
And, the thing that I admire so much about what you did is, at that crossroad, you decided to take that unconventional path, whereas I took a more conventional path. So on that, I took the more risk-averse route, and that carried through into when I started doing my own creative projects. I still tried to approach it in a risk-averse way, because that psyche had been built in. So I think it's the psychology overall of what we're raised with. And I think other people from various backgrounds, especially where they come from immigrant parent backgrounds, will be able to relate to the idea of, yes, a certain expectation is placed to take a stable, risk averse, and yes, ideally something that makes good money route. And what comes from that is anything that you do creative on the side, keep it as a hobby. Because it's, we need to say, it will come from a saving background, a saving generation, right? Save for the future. And so that approach in the whole, yes, the psychology, money around it, there's definitely a frugal element, but I think it's what is the point of building up that capital for? And it's not for these things on the side that you think can have an impact. It's ensure that stability carries forward, because us as the previous generation, speaking on behalf of them, we didn't have that. Yeah. So we've given you that foundation for you to then go and do that. So taking that all in, I like the use of the word overwhelming. It does depend on how you react to it. I'm not signaling either way that means, okay, if you have a positive social impact idea, put 100% of something into it. It all depends on your own belief of what value you apply to it. But I definitely think there is room to do more than the conventional way that we're raised to do what we can with our money, save for the future. But also, if you think there's something else that you want to build out, that again, you're not going to regret at the end of your life for not doing, then yes, it requires a money investment, which is something that took me time. But to kind of overcome that, I had to process all of this to start to think, if I don't do it, I will regret it later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where I think the recognition that, life is temporary, it's short, our time's running out, I think can be quite empowering to get you to start, I guess, doing more. And I think that recognition has certainly helped me in my path of being like, even though there might be skepticism around the choices that I'm making, just do it, right? Like, life's short. I think I try and pack as much life experience into my life as possible in a frugal way, obviously. And then I think the other thing that's important in that recognition is, in living a life, hopefully without that much regret, is living your values. Yeah. So I think something that's really important to me, and why Project Chakra is the thing that I do, is because there's this Gandhi quote where he says, happiness is when what you think, say and do are in alignment. And Project Chakra enables me to action what I think and say. So I think that's quite important to me.
Yeah, it's amazing that you brought that up, because there's again, something that I heard from, he's another podcaster called Chris Williamson, and anyone that's listened to previous episodes, this is probably the third time I've brought him into a conversation, which shows that I listen to a lot of his stuff, but also, once you mention someone 3 times, they take notice, right? So Chris, if you're listening, then firstly, thank you for your moments of inspiration, but shout out. But no, what he touches on this idea, which is exactly going back to your point, of what he calls an alien eyes view. And what it's saying is that, many people have these values that they say they live by and what they prioritize. But if an alien was to come down, assuming it doesn't have any mind reading abilities, the only way they can identify what you value is your actions on a daily basis, or what you're actioning. If what you say you value is unaligned with the alienized view of what you are doing, then there is a misalignment or a lack of coherence in what you say your values are and your daily activities that are doing it. So it's basically it's wrapping what you've said in another way, but it's one way that people can adopt the mindset that if they look back on their week, and assuming that it doesn't have to be an alien, but the idea of like a foreign species who don't understand how humans operate, i.e. what they prioritize and what they think is valuable, if they were just to see what you were doing in your week, does that align with what you say is most important to you and that you're looking to achieve? If not, then there is this cognitive dissonance, or there's something that's not aligned, that either you need to change what you say your priorities are, or you need to change what you're doing in order to allow those two things to marry up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's never going to be always perfect. And I'm not suggesting that I'm 100% in line with all these things, but we can try our best, right? So yeah, I completely agree with what you say. How do you relate to kind of now transitioning from, I guess, the path that you've taken and trying to be more conscious around these things? Like how do you feel like you're doing in that pathway?
It's a great question, and a great one to bring out at the tail end of a year, although this episode probably won't come out till the start of the year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. And hope you had a good Christmas. But it's one of the things that probably has played on my mind quite a lot, which is not to live in this huge bubble of regret, but there are, especially as this podcast builds out and the network builds out as a result of it, there is very much a multi-pronged benefit to this, where it's the type of people that I want to come across, because not only do they inspire me, but they have inspiring things to say for other people, which I want to put out there. But off the back of maybe some of the unexpected things that I've learned from it, some of the talking points that I've brought up in, if anyone's seen any clips that I've done, the idea of like unconscious biases that people have either at work, which happens a lot, especially when people take a more unconventional route. If you go into a big corporate or a big bank, it is less, because, equality and diversity is such a big thing. But, when people are exploring lesser known paths, especially for people from certain backgrounds, for instance, becoming a founder. So I had a black founder on recently called Damilare, or having a journalist on. I had a half Indian, half English girl called Lucy. I've had a mixed race girl who's half English, half British from Nigeria, and she's an actress. People from these backgrounds, when they go into these industries, there's still a lot of unconscious bias that exists because there has not been as much representation from those backgrounds.
Right.
It can become a chicken and egg. If there's not the representation, then it doesn't increase diversity. If there's not diversity, there's no representation. So how do we get those things to align? And I think fundamentally, there are things that organizations, not even just organizations, but initiatives can do differently to allow these things to line up. I didn't think these were things that I necessarily saw passion or interest in, but those things have naturally come about organically through the podcast. Aligning that with the fact that I've worked in corporate for so long, I appreciate the corporate world, but it doesn't necessarily fit in with my, beliefs of are they my core values versus an alienized view. In an alienized view, I have a corporate job, but would I underlying be like, I can't wait for the next 40 years in a corporate job? Absolutely not. So those things are things that I'm starting to realize. But to your point of taking risk but being frugal, it still is the idea of not necessarily being like, right, 100% needs to align from tomorrow, But it's every step where I think there's these pertinent things where in an industry, i.e. corporate, that I've spent 10 years in, the things that I'm interested in now have their place that I can apply it to that world. And those things are now in motion. So it's a good time to ask it. An even better thing to do would be in 3 to 6 months, you to be like, so how's it looking now? And I can say, yes.
Yes, I'm going to hold you accountable. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think just as you're saying there, like, for me, obviously we've spoken about risk a lot in this podcast. For me, I've felt like I've never taken a risk. It could be perceived as risk to people who are unfamiliar with the path that I'm taking, but because I am constantly feeling the value of the choices that I'm making, and I can hopefully see a pathway ahead. Like for me, like the choices that I've been making have been obvious and clear, and they haven't felt like risks to me. And so maybe, you know, it's not advice, but maybe I guess for you going forward, like check yourself to feel how these choices are feeling. Like, do they feel like risks or do they not feel like risks? Like maybe the thing it could be perceived as risk, but actually it could feel quite clear to you.
I love that, and it's such a interesting point to finish on, because in you saying that, do you think that you don't feel it as a risk because you're not scared to take that step, or is it you don't see it as a risk because you know by default, and like you've touched on, that this is the thing that I want to do, almost to the point that it's a need to do because everything that you've built up and the commitment that you've made to it? What makes you say it's not a risk?
I think it's probably a combination of the things that you've said. I think it's not a risk because going back to that point I said earlier, I can see people who are 10, 20 years ahead of me and they're doing all right. So that is reassuring. And I think the value that I'm feeling taking that journey is reinforcing that thought, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting because, you know, I've touched on a few different quotes that have meant something to me, but there's one I heard in recent time that's really ended up being memorable to me, probably because I think certain moments of inspiration come to you at the points in life that you need it, or they stand out more at certain points. And this quote was saying that if you don't fear failing at something, then you probably don't value the success of that enough. And so it was just, you know, that's why I wanted to bring out what you meant by the risk thing, because what I also think is, if you are scared, if there's a fear and you're scared that you're going to fail at it, then you actually care about succeeding it enough to take that, and then go back to the word risk. And so I think, you know, for me, there are certain things that really strongly applies to, and this is one of them where, and it also defines how you end up performing or turning up to that. So I want to do well at this podcast or the things that I build off the back of it, but I'm scared that it won't work out because I want it to succeed. You can look at a relationship and think the same thing. If you're not afraid that your relationship is going to fail, you probably don't care enough about it succeeding. And so, you know, to this point, that's why I think it's really interesting to understand how your mindset works when you consider the risks that you don't perceive as risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, so there's still that kind of fear around kind of taking that path. And then like, I like the feeling of that discomfort, but you know, if you think about, for me, over the past 3 years, like the major feelings that I've been feeling is extreme discontent, extreme financial insecurity, you know, like all of these insecurities, although I'm feeling them and they take a toll, they also are the things that give you this intensity to keep on going. Right? So it is a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's amazing to understand that mindset.
Sorry, and the last thing, and I think maybe this rounds it off nicely, given that we've been talking about our upbringing parents, is that the one, like, firstly, I'm currently only responsible for myself, which is a big factor. And because I guess of all the hard work that our parents have and grandparents have done, like, let's say this completely fails, like, you do have that family support backing you up. Like, it's not like I have currently, you know, a wife, kids, and my current income is dependent on making us feel okay. So I think there are lots of factors in why it was, again, very intentional for me to choose this path early when I have less responsibilities.
Yes, no, I love that, and it's so interesting to hear the way that you have the way that you do perceive fear and the risk of the unknown that's ahead of you. A great thing about fear is that it stops you. Fear helps you do the things that you don't want to do, but it also stops you doing the things that you do want to do. So fear works in both ways, right? Yeah. And in this case, it's overcoming that idea of you do want to do it, but you're scared to do it, right? Yeah. And that's fear coming in, but you're able to reframe that and almost channel that in a way of it fuels you and it drives you to do it. And it's something that I noticed in a lot of people who have persevered and really going on to achieve big things. That in itself gives me enough confidence that the sky's the limit for Project Chakra, that no matter what challenges it faces, at the core of not only what it does, but having someone like you, and I assume your cousin has kind of a similar mentality behind it, no doubt that it's gonna make massive strides for what it's doing.
Oh, amazing. I really appreciate you saying that, and it does mean a lot to hear that. So yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you.
From one Anand to another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I must say at this point, when you described, I guess, what this podcast was about, and I guess going back to the roots, when you explained that to me, I really, really empathized with that approach. And as soon as you described it to me, I was like, yes, this is great, because I think I don't know of any other kind of podcast that touch so significantly on that prior journey before you, because I think actually there's so much of us that we're not in control of and are fortunate to be born into, that paying homage to what's gone on before is super important. So appreciate, I guess, exposing this narrative to the world, and also thank you, because coming on this podcast has meant that yesterday and the day before I spoke to my parents about these things.
Amazing.
And it's encouraged these conversations. So yeah, thank you for that.
No, I love that. No, thanks so much. And yeah, like I said, with this episode coming out at the start of the year, it's hopefully this can inspire people who listen to it to whatever it may be, that whether we talked about the risk relativity or the approach to fear, if it can help ignite someone to do something that maybe they wish they'd done sooner, then we've already done a great job. So thanks for being part of it.
Amazing. Thank you, mate. Cheers.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, then you will love my full-length conversation with Simon Alexander Ong, which you can check out right here. So feel free to give it a tap. And if you haven't done so already, then you can hit the subscribe button over here so you can make sure you're alerted as soon as the next episode is out.